everyone, welcome to the Dill Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo. I'm continuing along with my New York Film Fest 60 coverage. If you want to check out the first video I posted for the New York Film Festival, my review of White Noise, Noah Baumbach's new film hitting Netflix very soon, you can check out that review already on the channel. And later today, I'll be posting a review for the final film I saw at the New York Film Festival, She Said. But right now, you're watching this review for Women Talking, Sarah Polley's return to the director's chair after 10 years. It's been 10 whole years since her documentary Stories We Tell premiered in 2012. With a lot of time, it's interesting to see some directors grow and some directors kind of tamper out, you know? After so much time, sometimes directors come back with a big swing and sometimes it doesn't always work. Sometimes it feels like they've been out of the game for so long that they feel a little rusty, you know? There's some ring rust getting back in the ring. But some directors take the time off and really craft something magical, amazing, personal, relevant, and Sarah Polley is an example of that. A director who took the time off from her last film to this film and really spent time crafting a nuanced work that, like I said, is timely, is engaging, feels relevant to today, but also feels relevant to the time period it took place in, being 2010, which is not too far removed from present-day history, but again, is more than a decade removed, and one that I hope continues to serve its purpose in the future as a reminder that women's voices should be heard, should be listened to, and I think that's what's so amazing about this film, first and foremost, is how timely it feels. I hope the issues that are presented in this film are not issues we're dealing with 50 years from now, but even if they are, which sadly is a horrible truth that unfortunately we do need to think about, and it's absolutely gut-wrenching to think about, but this film is always going to serve as a great reminder of the power that women can have when they do come together, when they support one another, and when they make their voices heard, and for the men in their lives who decide to listen, decide to actually want to be part of the change as well. There are a lot of evil men characters in this film, but there is one in particular that is kind of that ally figure to also show men that they should not be absent from the discussions either. And as a man watching this film, I felt encouraged to continue supporting the women in my life and making sure that their voices are continued to be heard. And I hope that's what this film stands for, even years removed from now. I think in 10 years, in 20 years, 30 years, no matter how much progress we've made, I hope this is always a great reminder of the progress we can still make. Just like so many films from 50 years ago are still teaching us today. What I'm trying to say is that Sarah Polley has created essentially a cultural landmark in cinema. I really do think this is going to be a film so many people come back to as one of the most important works of the year. Now, I definitely think there are elements of Women Talking that prevent it from being the absolute best of the year, but on paper, in terms of just its script, in what it's trying to say, in the actual conversations it's having, it is probably the most important film of the year. The film follows an isolated religious community. The film basically centers on these 8 women in a barn trying to make this really life-changing decision. They're amongst so much violence and so much abuse from the men in their community, and when the men leave the community for work, they come together in this barn, almost like this secret underground meeting where they have to basically weigh out the pros and cons of leaving the colony altogether and just fleeing, or staying and fighting, and what the difference between those two situations brings.
We would be forced to leave the colonies if we do not forgive these men.
And what makes Women Talking so nuanced is that not all the women are in agreement at the very start. There are women who want to leave, who just want to leave this whole past behind them, go forward, take their kids and go. And then there are women who want to stay and fight, that have something that they want to prove. You start to see how both sides, while correct, also have severe detriments. You know, there is a detriment to leaving life behind, especially in the midst of 2012. These women dress different, these women talk different. They have never seen the outside world. They don't know what the outside world brings to them. There's an excitement about what is on there and what lurks beyond the shadows, but there's also a fear that maybe in the grander scheme of the world that nothing is going to change, that they're going to be treated just as poorly as they were in this community itself. And then the pros obviously being the freedom, just the fact that they are being able to escape the horrible situations that they're going through. And then you have the other side, of course, being the staying and fighting, and the major con being that maybe you won't win the fight. Because when it comes down to sheer brute strength, I mean, these men, they have weapons, they have numbers over these women, and that's also terrifying to think about. But the pros being that you're really making a statement, and I think that's what's so beautiful about this film, is that as an audience member watching this film, you start to lean one way, and then you start to lean the other way. You really start to see all sides of this agreement. And yes, on paper, some people may say it sounds a little bit boring, you know, it's just a bunch bunch of people sitting around and talking. But the same could be said for a classic, 12 Angry Men. This actually reminded me of this generation's 12 Angry Men, where you have all these very extremely talented actors sitting around just talking about moral dilemmas and decision making and pros and cons and societal norms and the breaking of societal norms and the purpose that they as a group are trying to serve. I mean, there are so many parallels that can be made to 12 Angry Men. Obviously, 12 Angry Men is a group of men. In this case, it's a group of women. And in that sense, it's talking about just one particular case, one jury verdict. Whereas here, it's just women's rights in general and the ability to either flee or fight against the abuse that they are encountering on their day-to-day lives. And it comes with a lot of tragedy. This is a film that is very tough to watch because despite not seeing a lot of the abuse from the men hands-on, we do see a lot of the ramifications of the abuse in the bruises on these women, on the blood that flows from these women after they have been tormented, after they have been violated, after they have been abused. And it's heartbreaking to watch. It's absolutely devastating. But at the same time, it creates a sense of urgency and a sense of awareness to pull the audience in and to say that this has to stop. Not just for this community in 2010, in this very small bubble, but in the world in general. Even the abuse that isn't physical, the mental and emotional abuse as well. I mean, we deal with all types of abuse in this film, and we deal with all types of conversations about that abuse in this film, and that's what Sarah Polley does so well. She's adapting a book, so obviously a lot of the credit has to be given to the source material, to Miriam Toews, who created the novel, but Sarah Polley really puts her own voice into this. Like I said, with a hiatus, she's been able to really find her voice and translate exactly what she wants to say to the audience without seeming too preachy either. I mean, the whole film is not the characters looking at the camera and saying, this is right and this is wrong and this is what you should do and you have to get up and fight. No, it's just these characters talking and discussing with one another and often disagreeing, but then coming together in real harmony and compromise. The characters in this film can just exist and be humans and talk with one another, and the audience is able to 100% get on board with what it's trying to say without being preachy. And that's just what I think is so beautiful about this screenplay. I think it is easily my favorite screenplay of the year, just on paper. As for the performances, I think the performances here are absolutely excellent. I wouldn't consider anyone the lead of the film just because it is such an ensemble effort. Every actor gets their own time to shine, their own moment in the spotlight, their own Oscar moment, their own Oscar scene that could get them nominated. But Rooney Mara is, she's the top billed actress. She has a little bit more than the other actresses just in her storyline. You also have Claire Foy, Jessie Buckley, Judith Ivey, Frances McDormand, all these powerhouse actresses who bring so much to their roles. I think this would have worked well with any ensemble, but the fact that this ensemble is so good only heightens this material, only makes it more urgent, more amazing to hear these actors, communicate with their voices and bring their own frustrations to these roles.
We know that we've not imagined these attacks. We know that we are bruised and terrified.
You also have Ben Whishaw as August Epp, and August is one of the most interesting characters in this because he is the scribe actually writing out the pros and cons for these women. He is a school teacher in the community. He 100% sides with the women. He understands where they're coming from, and he is their ally essentially, but even he learns a lot through this film too. He has to kind of hear all these experiences and process it for himself, and you start to see his frustrations with this community, but also the frustration in not being able to really speak out as a man for these other male figures in this community. It's a very nuanced character, it's a very complex character, and it's one of the most fascinating characters in the film. This film still is about the women first and foremost, but I think having August just as this other outside perspective just makes the story more well-rounded and gives us a little bit more insight to multiple different perspectives in this film without giving a real voice to the evil characters in this film. So for all those reasons, I really do think Women Talking is going to be one of the most influential films of this year and maybe of this whole decade. I really think what it has to say is so vital and so important. But there's always a but, and this is the thing that breaks my heart because in a film like this, it's heavily reliant on its script, on its dialogue, on just the performances itself. But Women Talking is a very interesting case where I think the actual aesthetic and the style gets in the way. I think oftentimes we hear the argument of style over substance, and the fact that, a film will look really good but not really have anything to say or not really have the characters or the storylines to back up how beautiful it looks. I think this is the exact opposite, where I think what it is saying is so amazing and so important and so integral, but the way it's being presented and the actual visuals here totally take away some of the power of its words. In this case, Women Talking has a very muted, very muddy aesthetic. I mean, everything's in this grayish blue hue. It's a very desaturated look. Some people have made the argument that this aesthetic really works for the film to give it a real dreary, tragic nature to then overcome. But the problem is, because the film is so minimalist in its presentation as is, when you put this really, really noticeable and glaring effect over it, it really stands out and becomes more of a distraction than anything. I'm fine with a muted color palette, but when they go so far in the opposite direction to make it a point to make it desaturated, it really just took away from the overall power that it could have had, especially in its first act. I think as the film goes along, as it gets more intense, as the women finally come to an agreement on which decision they're going to make, whether to flee or to stay and fight. I won't spoil which decision they make, but once they make that decision and seeing how they then carry out that plan, that's the most exciting stuff, and that's when I was able to kind of like forgo the visual aesthetic. But in that first half especially, I was just so distracted by the visuals, and it was a real shame because I really wanted to be fully invested with this from the start to finish, and I was with the words. I mean, if I had closed my eyes and just listened to the words coming at me, I think I would have loved this. I think I would have slapped 5 stars on it and called it a day. But the fact of the matter is, because the visual aesthetic gets in the way so much, it's so hard to ignore, I found myself struggling to ease into this film because of that, and I think that's one of the major flaws, and that may honestly hold some people back from fully committing and fully getting on board with this film, because it takes some time to get into. It takes some time to really ease into the natural feel of it, because everything is so murky, it's so drab. It doesn't have that sense of urgency that you should feel from a film like this. That being said, it is a nitpick, because the stuff that is being said is so important. Sarah Polley's direction with her actual actors, the way they interact, the way people are placed in the frame, I think that's all really good, and I think Sarah Polley is definitely a contender to get a screenplay nomination and probably a director nomination as well. I mean, we've been seeing a trend of women directors being more visible in the awards consideration, and we saw it with 2 years in a row with a woman winning Best Director. We saw it with Chloe Zhao for Nomadland. We saw it with Jane Campion for Power of the Dog. I think it's a great thing that the Academy is embracing women directors, more so now than ever, and I do think Sarah Polley stands a chance of getting nominated. But I do think it's stylistic decision making in terms of the aesthetic, in the way it's shot, in the way it's colored, in the way it's executed. I just don't love all those decisions, so for that reason, it kind of prevents me from putting it at the very top of my list for the best of the year, but this is still a great film that I really urge people to watch. I almost hope with the film festival reception that maybe there's a way they kind of change the aesthetic and kind of get rid of some of the desaturation. I don't think that will happen, but who knows? There's still a little bit of time before this hits theaters, so maybe they'll make that change, and if they do, then I could see this being my favorite film of the year.
We will have to ask ourselves who we are.
If you saw Women Talking, let me know down below what you thought of this film. Are you excited to see Sarah Polley back after so many years? Are you excited to see this ensemble? I mean, Jessie Buckley, Claire Foy, Rooney Mara, they're all incredible in this film. Are you excited to see them? And what awards do you think this is going to win come award season? I really don't know how they're going to pick amongst this plethora of amazing actresses. Maybe I lean Jessie Buckley just because she has kind of the meatier scenes to work with here. I think Ben Whishaw definitely stands a chance of getting nominated. It'll be very interesting to see more people responding to this film as it trickles out, as more people see it. I'm excited to have this conversation with so many different people and continue having conversations about women empowerment, about feminism, about the wrongs that so many people have committed toward women. As I said, later today I'll be posting a review for She Said, which oddly enough does tackle a lot of the same themes about feminism and about women empowerment, so I will be back with a review for that later today. Until then, see you next time. Thanks for watching.